Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis, LA and dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello.
Hello, can I please speak with William Gibson?
I think you have him.
Bill, it's such a pleasure to have you on the line. Thank you so much for taking this call and for being part of the Quarantine Tapes. I really wanted to talk to you in these dire, difficult, and perhaps delirious times.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, thank you. Wherever here might mean, where does here mean for you now?
Oh dear, I ask myself that hourly. Really, I mean, this is I keep trying to come up with equivalent experiences in my lifetime, and the only one that works at all for me, although this I'm sure would seem very strange, is the summer of 1967, because I think both these periods have a sort of both those periods have for me a sort of superliminal quality. From day to day, one literally didn't know what to expect. Not that they're similar in any other way, but those the only two periods in my life where I simply, I wake up in the morning and haven't a clue what's been happening while I've been asleep. And, then I pick up my iPhone and find out and, off again for another day of it.
Take me back to summer 1967.
Well, I had gone to Toronto from my hometown in Virginia, having only a vague idea, I think, that Canada was another country. In that American way of looking at things. And I arrived in this city which I had never really imagined. And I was intending,
Hello.
I was intending to go eventually to San Francisco, and I thought I would hitchhike from Toronto to Vancouver. But I got there in March of 67, and there was still a bit of snow and whatnot. And I started looking around, and I found myself in this remarkable city that I'd really scarcely heard of before. And I hung around long enough for it to launch itself into its summer of 67. And right through the summer, from one day to the next, I had absolutely no idea what was going to be happening to me or to the world. It was just completely wide open. And this feels completely wide open to me, although it doesn't resemble my 1967 much at all. And it certainly doesn't resemble the kitsch 1967 of, nostalgia, cultural nostalgia.
Well, what is so amazing to me is to hear you say that, because you've imagined so much the future. You've always tried in some way or another, maybe not to bring us closer to the future, but to bring us to an understanding of what it might look like. So if you can't imagine it, what am I supposed to do?
Well,
I mean, and I think, of that wonderful line of Mark Twain where he says it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future.
Yes, indeed. And I treasure that. I treasure that line. That's wonderful, actually. And I agree completely. There's a line of dialogue in Agency, my most recent novel,
Yes.
where two characters who are in the 2070s, I think, are talking about 2017, the year 2017, and they're in touch with someone in 2017. And the wife says, "Oh, I can't imagine that these people aren't continually happy. That nothing bad's really happened yet." And her husband says, "Well, it is just before the pandemics," and that's plural. And it never gets the book never goes back to that. But I had pandemics on my list of bad things we've been expecting for decades.
I mean, what is so amazing at this moment, and to hear you say it again, adds to it, is that in my life, which is at this point not that short, it was short many years ago, but now it's become quite a bit longer. In my life, I've never experienced anything like this at all. Something so global, pandemic everywhere. And it seems like it is nearly the only news we get now. Is this news of the pandemic. And what you once said, that when you want to know how things really work, study them when they're coming apart. And I know it's a sentence you first read in Samuel Delany, but I'm wondering, in studying what is happening now, things are certainly falling apart.
Oh, absolutely.
And what do you see? What do you see as truly imploding or exploding, or however you might want to express what this moment holds?
Well, it seems fractal in that regard. Like everything, my biggest takeaway from it is that everything is indeed connected to everything else, and that particularly our human culture is so incredibly interconnected and interdependent in ways that we're not ordinarily conscious of. So that when you have a global disruption on this scale, the news every day is filled with countless large and small things that are connected, that affect one another in ways that we can't ordinarily be aware of. Things as simple sometimes as lines of sort of chains of commerce, so that if things don't arrive at the ports in California, they can't make it to Walmart. And so something that happened in China 2 months ago is causing an empty shelf Walmart in Kansas in this very direct but previously invisible way. We sort of knew that was the case, but to have it physically demonstrated to us, things like that, so many of them in so many different ways. Like who would have guessed that the sinisterly long nasal swabs used in testing for the coronavirus are only manufactured in Italy, and that's causing a problem.
I mean, the amount of information we're getting now, about things like that, these swabs made in Italy. It's extraordinary, and I'm, you know, I read you that line, when you want to know how things really work, study them when they're coming apart. And I know that this was posted on Twitter not long ago, and you see Twitter as a way to glance across the psychic state of the planet. In a brief moment in the morning, you get up, you might look at Twitter, and you will get, in matters of moments, a psychic feeling of what a temperature of what the world
Yeah,
might feel like.
yeah.
And what's the temperature like now?
Oh, I'd say it's fairly high.
Boiling.
I think yeah, it's definitely running. It's definitely running the temperature. Sometimes I look at Twitter and try to imagine what it would be like minus the pandemic, and I think we'd be seeing a lot more and a lot worse global climate change news, which we are in fact seeing, but it's not, not very much in the foreground at all. And that's all looking considerably worse, even since last year. But we're not focused on that. And I think I think in some way, and I'm not the first to say this, although I can't remember where I first saw it. The pandemic is a bit. You could look at it as an opportunity to experience what will happen when the bad climate, the really bad aspects of climate change really start kicking in, and it will be like the pandemic, but exponentially and unimaginably larger.
And connected to this pandemic. I mean, it's all interconnected in ways that are, in a way, where that part was predictable.
Well, yes, and apparently, I mean, it seems to me that all of the things that were really, all of these ominous things that have been lurking in the wings now for years, decades, um, they are all anthropogenic.
Right.
They are all things caused by humankind. All of the things that we're really frightened of in the world today are the result of human beings doing things that they really had no idea would ever be doing any harm. These pandemics, in a sense, I've read, are the result of how we live with animals and how we live. More of us live increasingly closer to wild animals that human beings previously had relatively little contact with.
Has your interpretation of your past writings changed over the past decades? Have your early works, as it were, taken on new and unforeseen meanings in light of recent events? I know that you've spoken about the interpretive fallacy, and it's something that interests me greatly also. Having studied 100 years ago comparative literature,
Yeah.
it's something that is William Gibson a better interpreter of his own work? I mean, all of this is interesting, and we could explore it at great lengths, but what's happening now has had such an effect that I'm wondering, when you look back, or when you look back or when you think back, is there a change in the way you think about your own long career, which has had such an impact?
Well, when I'm in when I look back, and I don't ordinarily look back at my own work very frequently, and I've had to over the past couple of years, because there's been talk of doing adaptations like screen and television versions of things. And I've had to go back and look at the original text and say, looking for things really that are dated, and wondering how those could be interpreted, say, for a television series. And I didn't overall. I don't think I did too badly, and I've in that sense, there are things that one cannot, no one can really predict what's really going to happen. I mean, it's always felt to me that I was hedging my bets and being vague where it suited me strategically, and building in sort of, a pyramid of narrative of some kind. But from the beginning, in my work, there was a sense of the natural world having been disrupted. It's not discussed, but for instance, in Neuromancer, there's a glancing mention. They're walking through a broken down palace in Istanbul, and they come to there's a stuffed horse, a taxidermied horse, and there's this brief discussion about the pandemic that killed all the horses, and it's never mentioned. It's never mentioned again. But it's just this odd little thing, and I've always had those, cities that
little glimpses,
little hints that something's gone wrong, but that people have they've gotten used to it.
But something has gone wrong for a long time.
Yeah, something's gone wrong for a long time. So
it's not as though the problem emerged in the last 10 years. One could, I think in Gibson's terms, one could imagine that it's gone wrong for, let us say, a century.
Yeah, yes, and that is, I think that's the result of my having decided, with regards to science fiction, and some years before I ever began to try to write it, that one of the failings of American science fiction was that it seemed to be set in a sort of perpetual present, in that the future in American science fiction really didn't seem to have any past, whereas the European science fiction, there was always a sense of the past. And I decided that was because Europeans live within. In Europe, one lives within the past. It's
right.
Still there. The buildings are there. You can walk out and see it every day. You're never away from it. Whereas in America, in the 1940s, when a lot of the science fiction I read as a child was written, there was, if you got tired of the present, you moved west and built.
Right. Go west, my boy. It's true, but and I may have said this to you before, but even after 3 and more decades of living in this country, and I think not quite having gotten rid of my accent, I am still so amazed by the American English way of speech when you say that's history and that means that's irrelevant. I mean,
It's over.
It's over, but I mean, you couldn't, for the life of any language, translate it into any other. If you said in French, c'est de l'histoire, they would say, histoire de quoi? History of what? So in the English language, in the English American language, saying that's history means it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah,
There is
that's amazing.
isn't it? There's a passage in pattern recognition that I'd love to read to you, because I think in many ways, for you to interpret it much in the way that I was asking you to think about the whole notion of interpretive fallacy might become interesting. You say, we have no idea now of who or what the inhabitants of our future might be. In that sense, we have no future, not in the sense that our grandparents had a future or thought they did. Fully imagined cultural futures were the luxury of another day, one in which now was of some greater duration. For us, of course, things can change so abruptly, so violently, so profoundly, that futures like our grandparents have insufficient now to stand on. We have no future because our present is too volatile. We have only risk management, the spinning of the given moment scenario, pattern recognition. How does this strike you in this reading at this moment on this day?
Well, now that you bring it up, it strikes me to be quite descriptive of the present moment.
Yeah.
And our now has become briefer in the past 3 months than I would have imagined possible. I was in London at the end of my novel tour on what they were calling Brexit Eve. It was, like the last night before Brexit happened, and whatever since Brexit ever happened. And I was very jet lagged and exhausted, and I'd been traveling for weeks. And I went out and wandered around and found myself in Leicester Square, just sort of stunned by the mood. There was something going on. It felt to me like the end of something, but I couldn't quite believe that simply that it was simply the end of the pre-Brexit era. It felt much bigger. And when I think of that now, it feels like for me that was when the now shortened, because I had been watching the coronavirus outbreak in Italy out of the corner of my eye, and I've been busy with a lot of other things, but I had some sense of something very significant was happening. And somehow I think I'll always remember that evening as somehow my first awareness of the now shortening even more. Because if someone from now had told me on that evening what was happening for them, it would have been hard for me to believe. We've come that far in such
a short. Yeah, I think it will have huge effects. I mean, it already does have huge effects on our psyche in ways that we can't even quite imagine. I know you are a fan of Umberto Eco's essay, Ur-Fascism, and Carlo Ginzburg, extraordinary Italian historian, said that fascism has a future. And I'm wondering if you think that term can aptly be used at the present time?
Well, I use it myself in my own inner dialogue, and that really is because my favorite professor of English literature while I was an undergraduate had made his central study of English literature was around the mass psychology of fascism. So
who was that? Who was
he? Dr. John Doheny at the University of British Columbia, and he introduced me to Hannah Arendt's work and to other texts of fascism. I think that was prior
to Eco's essay. Yes.
Yeah, to Eco's,
would have been.
Eco's essay. But he introduced me to the idea that rather than being some incredibly exotic, almost magically wicked, super evil, extreme human condition, that fascism was something that all of us carry the roots of at all times. That's what's dangerous about it. That it runs on human hardwiring. So its potential is never going to go away.
It's never far away.
Yeah, it's never far away. And one of the things that convinced me of that when I was studying that stuff was that I found the mass psychology of fascism to account for a fair amount of my own experience in the 60s counterculture. So, and I could also see it going on, going on in conservative governments at the time and whatnot. But where I could really see it going on was in the counterculture.
In places you wouldn't imagine it existing.
No, every commune. Not that I visited that many, but every commune I ever went to, there was this pong of fascism. There would be like one guy, and it was always a guy who was like the leader. And if you look at like Manson's operation was just a super pure version of that, and yeah, and I still think that it's not a very it's not a very popular view among people my own age who experience that stuff.
It matters little that it's popular. It matters that it's right. And I wish, Bill, we had more time to talk, because one of the things I would have loved to talk to you about is delusional mass crowd behavior.
Yes.
Which would have been fantastic, but sadly, I must bid you farewell and send you a virtual hug.
Yes,
and I'm hoping that we will see each other in person soon.
I hope so. I hope so too. Even seeing you on my iPhone has been a wonderful treat.
And for me too, it's been the first time that I've had one of these phone calls and seen my interlocutor, but seeing you really makes me very joyous. So, Bill, a huge hug to you.
Well, it's very mutual. Be well.
Be well. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.